September 12, 1683. Late afternoon light cuts through the smoke rising from Vienna's shattered walls. For 2 months, the city has burned, starved, and bled under Ottoman siege guns. Inside, fewer than 5,000 defenders remain standing. The rest lie buried in mass graves or rot in the streets where disease claimed them. Count Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg watches from the ramparts as another mine detonates beneath the Löbel bastion, sending stone and bodies skyward. His garrison has perhaps hours left before the walls fail, but on the wooded slopes of Kahlenberg Mountain, 3 miles northwest, something impossible is taking shape. Through the trees, Ottoman scouts catch sight of armor catching the sunlight. Then more, then thousands. The relief force that Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa had dismissed as weeks away stands ready to descend. At the column's head rides King John III Sobieski of Poland, so corpulent he requires assistance mounting his horse, yet dressed in armor that blazes like captured sunlight. Behind him mass the Winged Hussars, 3,000 Polish nobles in steel breastplates and leopard pelts, their backs fitted with wooden frames bearing eagle feathers that tower above their helmets. These frames aren't decoration, they're weaponized terror. The Ottomans have been fighting for 60 days straight. They've endured sorties, countermining, and the grinding attrition of siege warfare. Disease has hollowed out their camps. Their attention splits between the walls ahead and the Imperial German forces now pressing their flanks. They're exhausted, demoralized, and about to face the largest cavalry charge in recorded history. Sobieski raises his lance. The feathered wings behind 20,000 horsemen begin to rattle in the wind, producing a sound like nothing else on earth, a collective shriek that carries across the valley. The Ottomans hear it. They look up. They see what's coming. The charge begins. What happens in the next 3 hours doesn't just save Vienna. It reverses 3 centuries of Ottoman expansion into Europe and demonstrates how a perfectly timed shock assault, exploiting enemy exhaustion and psychological collapse, can shatter an army 10 times larger than the force that breaks it. This is the story of how discipline, timing, and the deliberate weaponization of terror transformed a desperate defensive stand into the most decisive cavalry victory in European history. The Ottoman siege of Vienna in 1683 was not an impulsive military adventure. It was the culmination of decades of strategic positioning, imperial ambition, and one man's catastrophic miscalculation about what victory would cost. Since 1529, when Suleiman the Magnificent first laid siege to Vienna and failed, the city had represented the westernmost limit of Ottoman power. For 150 years, the frontier had stabilized along the Danube, with neither the Habsburgs nor the Ottomans possessing sufficient strength to alter the balance fundamentally. Both empires traded border fortresses, raided each other's territories, and maintained an uneasy equilibrium punctuated by periodic wars. That equilibrium was shattered when Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa Pasha convinced himself that Vienna could fall. Sultan Mehmed IV had authorized a modest campaign to capture Habsburg frontier fortresses. Kara Mustafa saw something grander. He assembled an army estimated between 150,000 and 300,000 men. Chronicles vary, but even conservative figures place it above 120,000. He marched not for the border, but for the Habsburg capital itself. His motivation was transparently personal. Kara Mustafa craved the glory of capturing what Suleiman could not. Success would secure his position as the most powerful Grand Vizier in Ottoman history. Failure would result in execution. He knew this. Ottoman sultans did not forgive defeated commanders. The stakes were existential for both the city and the man besieging it. This created a perverse incentive structure. As the siege dragged beyond initial projections, Kara Mustafa couldn't retreat without admitting failure. Each week of stalemate increased his desperation. He ordered assault after assault, burning through manpower to force a breakthrough before relief could arrive. The siege became a race between Vienna's collapsing defenses and Kara Mustafa's dwindling resources, with both sides aware that time favored the one who could endure the longest. What Kara Mustafa failed to account for was European politics. The Ottoman-Habsburg conflict had long been complicated by France's cynical alliance with the Porte. dating back to 1536. France used Ottoman pressure to weaken Habsburg power and support Protestant factions within the Holy Roman Empire. This meant any Christian coalition would be fragile, built on temporary shared interest rather than genuine unity. But the scale of the threat at Vienna forced a calculation even France's Louis XIV couldn't ignore. If Vienna fell, the Ottomans would control the Danube Valley and possess a staging ground to penetrate Germany. The Habsburg collapse would destabilize the entire continent. Pope Innocent V recognized this and initiated aggressive diplomacy to assemble what would later be known as the Holy League. The coalition he constructed was politically unstable. German princes argued over costs and command. The Habsburgs fled Vienna while demanding that others defend it. Into this fractious assembly stepped King John III Sobieski, who insisted on supreme command and forced the Habsburgs to fund his march. His leverage was simple. Poland was the only power with both the military capability and willingness to relieve Vienna. Without Sobieski, the city would fall. When Emperor Leopold I fled Vienna on July 7, 1683, he left behind approximately 15,000 garrison troops and 8,700 civilian volunteers. Command fell to Count Ernst Rüdiger von Starhemberg, a 36-year-old, facing the largest Ottoman army assembled in decades. The siege began on July 14th with traditional demands for surrender. Starhemberg's response was immediate and unambiguous. "Let him come. I'll fight to the last drop of blood." This wasn't rhetorical bravado. Days earlier, news had reached Vienna of the massacre at Perchtoldsdorf, a town 15 miles south that had surrendered under the promise of mercy. The Ottomans slaughtered the population anyway. That betrayal eliminated any possibility of negotiated capitulation. Every defender understood that surrender meant death or slavery for the entire city. This knowledge transformed the siege into something beyond military engagement. It became existential. The garrison wasn't defending territory or political interests. They were defending their families from certain annihilation. The Ottoman assault followed established siege doctrine. Artillery pounded the bastions daily. Sappers dug tunnels beneath the walls, packed them with explosives, and detonated mines that sent towers crumbling. Each breach required desperate counter-efforts, rubble, timber, and human bodies thrown into gaps to plug the wall before Ottoman infantry could exploit the opening. Starhemberg's men repelled 18 major assaults in 2 months. But the real enemy wasn't Ottoman soldiers. It was attrition. Food supplies dwindled to near nothing. Water from the Danube was cut off, forcing reliance on contaminated wells. Disease spread through the cramped, filthy quarters where civilians huddled during bombardments. Dysentery, typhus, and simple infection killed defenders as efficiently as Turkish guns. By early September, only about a third of the original garrison remained combat-capable. Ammunition reserves had nearly exhausted. Starhemberg later admitted they had reached the last drop of blood. The city's survival depended entirely on relief arriving before the walls failed completely. This created an unbearable psychological burden. The defenders knew a relief force was assembling, but they did not know when or if it would arrive in time. Every day of continued resistance risked being the day before salvation, making the temptation of surrender strongest at the moment when endurance mattered most. Starhemberg maintained discipline through a combination of inspiration and threat. Mutiny would result in immediate execution. So would defeatist talk. The garrison held because Starhemberg gave them no alternative. Women and children participated directly in the defense, carrying ammunition and stones to the ramparts, tending to the wounded, and helping to rebuild the shattered sections of the wall. This wasn't volunteer heroism, it was survival. If the walls fell, everyone inside faced the same fate. The siege erased usual civilian military distinctions. Vienna became a city where every inhabitant was a combatant by necessity. This ordeal left permanent scars on the Viennese collective memory. The trauma of near destruction created what historians describe as an emotional reservoir that persists today, periodically resurfacing in political rhetoric about foreign threats and European identity. The siege demonstrated how military events become psychological landmarks that outlast the battles themselves. While Vienna endured, King John III Sobieski faced the logistical nightmare of assembling and moving a multinational army across hostile territory before the city fell. The Holy League coalition comprised nearly 70,000 men, including Polish, German, Austrian, Bavarian, and Saxon contingents, each with separate commanders, distinct languages, and competing interests. Coordinating this force required diplomatic skill equal to military competence. Sobieski possessed both. His victory over Ottoman and Tatar forces at Khotin in 1673 had established his reputation as the era's premier anti-Ottoman commander. When he demanded supreme command of the relief force, the German princes reluctantly agreed, recognizing that his tactical expertise outweighed their wounded pride. But Sobieski's motivation extended beyond military reputation. The fall of Vienna would expose the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth to Ottoman invasion from the southwest, creating a two-front threat that Poland couldn't survive. Saving Vienna was therefore strategically necessary for Polish security. Sobieski framed the campaign as a holy war to restore the ancient liberty of besieged Vienna, but his calculations were coldly pragmatic. Religion provided useful rhetoric to paper over political fissures, but national interest drove the decision. The march to Vienna exposed the coalition's fragility. Arguments erupted constantly over costs, supplies, and precedence. Polish forces insisted the Habsburgs must fund the expedition. German princes fought over command positions. Only the shared recognition that Vienna's fall would endanger everyone prevented the coalition from disintegrating before it reached the battlefield. Physically, Sobieski was past prime fighting age. Sources describe him as so large that he needed assistance mounting his horse, but he understood the importance of visual command presence. He wore magnificent armor and richly decorated garments, deliberately cultivating an image of majestic authority that unified the fractious coalition. The spectacle of leadership mattered as much as strategic decisions. Sobieski's theatrical self-presentation wasn't vanity. It was psychological warfare directed at his own allies, convincing them to follow a Polish king they privately resented. By September 10th, the relief force had crossed the Danube and climbed into the hills overlooking Vienna. They could see the Ottoman camp sprawling across the plains, with its crescent banners and smoke rising from the besieged city. Time was running out. Starhemberg's garrison was on the verge of collapse. The battle had to happen immediately. The core striking force of Sobieski's army was the Hussaria, Poland's elite heavy cavalry, which numbered approximately 3,000 at Vienna. These weren't professional soldiers in the modern sense. They were wealthy Polish nobles who could afford the costly equipment required and who dedicated their lives to martial training. Each hussar represented a substantial financial investment. The equipment, including armor, lances, sabers, pistols, and decorated garments, cost more than most families earned in a year. Only the nobility could afford it, which created a unique social dynamic. These were men who believed themselves inherently superior, not just to enemy soldiers, but to their own infantry. This arrogance translated into exceptional morale and a willingness to charge into situations other troops would refuse. The hussars' primary weapon was the kopia lance, typically exceeding 16 feet in length and sometimes reaching 19 feet. These weren't the light lances used by earlier cavalry. They were heavy impact weapons designed to generate maximum kinetic force at the point of contact. Contemporary accounts describe them impaling multiple men simultaneously, oft transfixing 2 persons at a time. The length meant hussars could strike infantry before pikemen could effectively respond. Their armor was robust enough to stop early musket fire, especially when charging at speed. Hussars used their horses as shields, crouching behind the animals' necks to minimize exposure until the moment of impact. The horses themselves were selected for size and strength, often partially armored, bred specifically for shock charges rather than sustained combat. But the defining feature was the wings. Large wooden frames, fitted to the saddle or armor, held eagle, vulture, or falcon feathers arranged to create a towering crest above each rider. Theories about their practical purpose vary. Some suggest they defended against Tatar lassos, but their primary function was psychological and sensory. When 3,000 mounted hussars charged downhill in formation, the collective sound of those feathered wings created a shriek Unlike anything else in warfare, it was loud enough to terrify infantry and spook enemy horses. This wasn't accidental. The wings were deliberately designed as weapons of terror, exploiting the fact that fear spreads faster than tactical information in pre-modern armies. An enemy who panics breaks formation. Broken formations can't resist cavalry charges. The wings accelerated this psychological collapse. Ironically, Vienna represented both the Hussars' greatest triumph and the beginning of their obsolescence. This style of shock cavalry, reliant on armor and momentum, was already becoming outdated as gunpowder weapons improved. Within 20 years, the expense of maintaining the Hussaria, combined with the financial exhaustion of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, would render them militarily unsustainable. The charge at Vienna was a magnificent anachronism, one of the last times heavy cavalry would decide a major European battle. The Battle of Vienna on September 12, 1683, was won before the cavalry charge began. This matters. The popular narrative of 3,000 hussars miraculously defeating 100,000 fresh Ottoman troops is a myth. The reality reveals more about military science than any miracle story could. When Sobieski positioned his cavalry on Kahlenberg Mountain that morning, the Ottoman army was already near collapse. 2 months of siege operations had depleted their manpower through disease, casualties, and exhaustion. Morale was shattered by repeated failed assaults on Vienna's walls. Critically, German and Austrian forces under Duke Charles of Lorraine had spent the morning engaging Ottoman positions, securing the Turkenschanze fortification, and pushing the Ottoman flanks back from the heights. By mid-afternoon, when Sobieski ordered the charge, the Ottoman army was divided, demoralized, and physically exhausted. They'd been fighting imperial infantry since dawn. Their attention and forces were split between Vienna's walls, the advancing Germans on their right, and now the cavalry massing on the slopes above them. The charge itself involved approximately 20,000 horsemen from multiple nations, including Polish, German, and Austrian cavalry. The hussars formed the tip of this spear, approximately 3,000 men in the vanguard. This was the largest cavalry charge in recorded history, measured by total participants. The tactical execution was brutally simple. The cavalry descended through dense woods, terrain that should have broken their formation, but which the Ottomans couldn't effectively defend, and emerged onto the plains with momentum already building. Ottoman guns tore gaps in the ranks, but armored cavalry at full gallop generates unstoppable kinetic force. Physics overrides courage. Contemporary accounts emphasize sound over sight. The shattering of Polish lances resounded over the battlefield as the hussars struck the Ottoman center. Chronicler Vespasian Kochowski described the impact. No sooner does a hussar lower his lance than a Turk is impaled on its spike, which not only disorders, but terrifies the foe. The lances didn't just kill, they were psychologically devastated. Watching comrades lifted off their feet and thrown backward by lance, impact destroys unit cohesion faster than casualties alone. The Ottoman lines didn't hold. They couldn't. They were exhausted, outnumbered at the point of contact, and facing a cavalry charge that exploited every tactical advantage. High ground, momentum, surprise timing, and demoralized opponents. The center collapsed within minutes. That collapse spread laterally as panic infected adjacent units. Kara Mustafa attempted a final countercharge, personally leading his Sipahi cavalry to rally the crumbling lines. He failed. German artillery and musket fire shattered the counterattack. Facing complete defeat, Mustafa made his final decision. He seized the holy banner of the Prophet, the sacred symbol of the campaign, grabbed his personal treasure, and fled the battlefield around 6 p.m. This act, more than the cavalry charge itself, sealed Ottoman defeat. When soldiers saw their supreme commander abandoning the field with the holy banner, they understood divine favor had been withdrawn. The retreat became a rout. Discipline evaporated. Units disintegrated into fleeing individuals. The Ottoman army didn't withdraw in good order. It collapsed into chaos. The entire engagement, from the cavalry charge to the complete Ottoman retreat, lasted approximately 3 hours. The speed of victory wasn't miraculous. It was the predictable result of a perfectly timed shock assault against exhausted, demoralized opponents who'd already been ground down by 2 months of siege warfare and a full day of infantry combat. Sobieski entered the abandoned Ottoman camp as the sun set, and what he found exceeded expectations. Kara Mustafa had fled so hastily that he'd abandoned not just military equipment, but enormous personal wealth. The Grand Vizier's tent was a mobile palace, silk carpets, fountains, jewelry, gold, and the military payroll for the entire army. The immediate strategic impact was unambiguous. Vienna was saved. The Ottoman army was shattered. Casualties remained disputed, with estimates ranging from 15,000 to 40,000 Ottoman dead, but the psychological damage was irreparable. An army that had seemed unstoppable had been routed in hours. Sobieski sent word to Pope Innocent XI, deliberately framing the victory in religious terms. Venemus, vidimus, Deus vicit. We came, we saw, God won, God conquered. This phrasing served multiple purposes. It minimized Sobieski's personal role, attributing victory to divine intervention rather than Polish arms. This made the victory a Christian triumph rather than a Polish one, which helped justify the enormous costs Poland had incurred and deflected Habsburg resentment at being saved by a rival power. But the coalition's political tensions didn't evaporate with victory. Arguments over spoils began immediately. Who controlled the captured Ottoman equipment? Who paid for the campaign? The Habsburgs insisted they'd borne the primary burden by defending Vienna for 2 months. Sobieski countered that without his intervention, there would be no Vienna to defend. These disputes would poison Polish-Habsburg relations for decades. For Vienna's survivors, relief mixed with trauma. The garrison had lost 2/3 of its strength. Civilians had watched their city burn, starved through months of siege, and survived only because help arrived, days before the walls fell completely. The psychological scars persisted. Some defenders suffered what we'd now recognize as post-traumatic stress. Others struggled with guilt that they'd survived when so many hadn't. The Ottoman retreat continued for weeks. Kara Mustafa attempted to rally remnants of his army, but never recovered cohesion. When news reached Sultan Mehmed IV, the Grand Vizier's fate was sealed. On December 25, 1683, Kara Mustafa was executed by strangulation with a silk cord, the traditional Ottoman method for high officials. His ambition had destroyed him precisely as he'd feared. The Battle of Vienna immediately became a part of mythology. Within weeks, it was being described as the salvation of Christendom, the moment Christian Europe finally halted Islamic expansion. This narrative was politically useful. It justified the Holy League's continued existence and provided moral legitimacy for the subsequent Great Turkish War. But the reality was more complex. Modern historians reject the idea that Vienna marked the beginning of Ottoman decline. The Ottoman Empire remained militarily competitive until approximately 1750. Vienna was a significant setback, not a systemic collapse. The empire's real problems, internal conservatism resisting military reform, fiscal exhaustion, and political instability, predated 1683 and wouldn't become fatal for another century. What Vienna actually changed was strategic initiative. For 3 centuries, the Ottomans had been a powerful force in Eastern Europe. After 1683, that reversed. Pope Innocent XI formalized the Holy League in 1684, and the coalition spent the next 16 years systematically rolling back Ottoman territorial control. The Habsburgs conquered southern Hungary and Transylvania. By the 1699 Treaty of Karlowitz, the Ottomans had lost most of their European holdings outside the Balkans. This shift had nothing to do with military superiority. It resulted from political will. The Holy League maintained unity long enough to exploit Ottoman weakness. Once that unity fractured, France returned to opposing the Habsburgs, Poland became embroiled in succession crises, and the Ottoman Empire stabilized its borders, remaining a significant power for another 2 centuries. The charge of the Winged Hussars became legendary precisely because it was spectacular and rare. Heavy cavalry charges were already obsolete by 1683. Improved firearms made them suicidally expensive against prepared infantry. Vienna worked because the Ottomans were unprepared, exhausted, and caught by surprise. It was the last time such tactics would succeed on such a scale. Today, the Battle of Vienna serves as a powerful symbol, divorced from historical reality. It's invoked in discussions about European identity, immigration, and cultural conflict. The date itself, September 11th, by the old Julian calendar used in 1683, has been weaponized in modern conflicts. Some scholars suggest Al-Qaeda deliberately chose September 11th, 2001, as a symbolic inversion of Christian triumph over Islam. Whether that theory holds, the fact that it exists demonstrates how the battle's mythological power exceeds its military significance. The siege left an emotional reservoir in Vienna that persists today. It's visible in the city's Baroque architecture, much of it rebuilt after 1683, and in periodic resurgences of anxiety about foreign threats. Right-wing populist movements in Austria explicitly invoke 1683 in anti-immigration rhetoric. The battle has become a contested site of memory, where competing groups project contemporary fears onto historical events. This is perhaps the battle's truest legacy, not the tactical lessons about combined arms or cavalry shock. Those became obsolete within decades, but the demonstration of how military events transform into cultural mythology. Vienna in 1683 was a siege that ended with a cavalry charge. Vienna today is a symbol, endlessly reinterpreted to serve present political needs. The physical battle lasted 3 hours. The cultural battle continues,